In a narrative like A Song of Ice and Fire, many of the blanks within the story need to be filled in by the readers themselves, especially when it comes to characters who only exist in the points of view of other people. But many of the ways in which the blanks have been filled in regarding Elia Martell are surprising, confusing, and seem to be incredibly unrealistic. In the minds of many, Elia Martell's importance as a character comes from two avenues. She is the wife who Rhaegar Targaryen abandoned for Lyanna Stark, and she is the sister that Oberyn Martell died for. And while these plot threads are likely the biggest role that she does play in the overall story, a lot of the assumptions about the kind of person that she was and how she felt about the trajectory of her own life and the lives of her loved ones don't seem to jive that well with context clues or basic common sense. One of the most prevalent beliefs about Elia Martell's role in whatever relationship developed between Lyanna and Rhaegar is that she may have actually been supportive of her husband taking on another lover or even another wife. Because she's from the more sexually liberated kingdom of Dorne, her perspective on and beliefs about monogamy might not be as strict as a woman from the other kingdoms. Aside from that, it is pretty common knowledge that Elia and Rhaegar weren't in love, so perhaps she was open to the idea of Rhaegar romancing Lyanna because he had true feelings for her. Again, her Dornish heritage, plus the fact that both of her brothers established long-term relationships for love rather than politics, could be used as potential contextual backup to the idea that Elia was fine with her husband adding another person to their relationship dynamic in the name of true love. This assumption of Elia's support for Rhaegar and Lyanna is even further bolstered by two speculations. The first hypothesis is that Elia was aware of and believed in Rhaegar's interpretation of the prophecy that guided his entire life, and therefore she was similarly invested in the idea of creating 3 heads of the dragon to save the world. And the second is that, because Elia was born disabled and having another child after Rhaenys and Aegon would have killed her, she acknowledged that Rhaegar taking on another lover or another wife was a necessity. And I'm not here to say that these prevailing theories about Elia Martell are impossible or cannot factually be true, but I think that they sound incredibly improbable, and they seem designed around fitting Elia into a specific narrative rather than relating to her as a person with her own wants, needs, beliefs, and feelings. The Dornish cultural argument seems like what might be the most favorable so-called evidence for Elia's consent to everything that Rhaegar did. But that also seems like a double-edged sword that most people don't actually acknowledge. Because sure, she might have been more sexually liberated as a result of being born in Dorne, but she was also raised to see herself as someone with power and choice in her own right. So the notion that she would willingly let her husband step out when most women in Westeros only put up with it because they have no other choice is a strange assumption to make. Another primary facet to this argument is that she would be okay with it because their relationship was political and not personal. But once again, there seems to be equal if not greater reasons for her to be against it for this very reason. As a Dornish woman from the kingdom's leading family, she likely had a broader political education than any other woman in Westeros. Thus, she would have seen all of the enormous threats that Rhaegar and Lyanna's coupling would have posed. Because, while Robert's rebellion was the most extreme result that could have come from Lyanna's disappearance with Rhaegar, anyone with a modicum of political knowledge and a lick of sense would have foreseen serious political instability as a possible outcome. And, as Rhaegar's wife and the future queen, Rhaegar's actions could have, and ultimately did, put her family and all of Dorne in a position where they had to fight and many had to die in service of Rhaegar's desire to have another child with the most highborn woman possible, which of course is a massive complication within itself. Because although Lyanna, Elia, and House Targaryen didn't survive the war, if they had, then their problems certainly wouldn't have ended. In theory, Rhaegar could have had another child with almost anyone in the world, and it wouldn't have posed a political threat. But he decided to leave the only daughter of House Martell for the only daughter of House Stark, which is a decision that would cause nothing but problems in the future. Because Elia was both Rhaegar's first legal wife and the mother of his firstborn children, in theory, no succession crisis should be caused if he married someone else and had more children later. However, because Rhaegar is with Lyanna, there are very serious political implications to their match, and it means that, whether it's House Stark or House Martell, someone has to seriously lose out. If we presume that Lyanna and Rhaegar weren't married, then Jon is still illegitimate and presents no political conflict in that sense. But Lyanna is a Stark, so the likelihood that House Stark and the North would abide the fact that the Crown Prince absconded with a teenage girl, ruined her prospects, and left her with a child who will inherit nothing, is extremely low. Even in the best-case scenario where the Starks don't immediately confront King Aerys and Rhaegar, there will be serious political consequences for Rhaegar's decision, which likely includes a pretty valid push for Jon to be legitimized in some manner. If we assume that Rhaegar and Lyanna were married, then there is still a great deal of political upheaval that can be fueled by this act. Regardless of previous Targaryen precedent, most people in Westeros believe that a man can only have one wife. Even in Westerosi cultures where men have more than one public relationship, there is still a designated primary spouse. In the Iron Islands, even if men can take salt wives, they still have a rock wife. And even in Dorne, men have paramours and wives. Placing multiple wives on a level playing field is a concept that only House Targaryen engages in, and it's one that nearly destroyed their dynasty before it even got off the ground. Because while polygamy among the Targaryens wasn't specifically outlawed, Maegor the Cruel was the last to engage in the practice, at least until Rhaegar's possible marriage to Lyanna. And while George R.R. Martin has specifically noted that the loss of Targaryen dragons and thus Targaryen power was a driving force behind the end of polygamy, it's not hard to see how badly having two rival claimants can go. After Aegon's conquest, the succession was muddied largely because Aegon had two wives who were on equal standing with one another. And on that basis alone, Elia's concern would have been valid. But something that someone who is supposedly very clever and astute would be keenly aware of is that while Aenys had a solid claim for the throne as the eldest brother, Maegor had a significant advantage because his mother wasn't just older than Rhaenys, she was actually alive to advocate for her son's claim too. It's difficult to separate truth from fiction in Fire and Blood, but it's pretty much indisputable that Maegor would not have been king were it not for his mother's intervention and political machinations. And unfortunately, it's not the only instance of a disputed claim nearly destroying the Targaryen dynasty, as the Dance of the Dragons also saw a claim dispute nearly demolish the family and the realm. With that in mind, Elia was always a sickly woman, and giving birth to Rhaenys and Aegon left her disabled and essentially on death's door. Many believe that having another child would actually kill her, which is used to explain Rhaegar's decision to leave her for Lyanna. So regardless of the fact that she was Rhaegar's first wife and Aegon was Rhaegar's first son, she knows that Lyanna comes from an incredibly powerful house, that Lyanna will probably be able to have more children, and that Lyanna will almost certainly outlive her. Ergo, the notion that she would approve of or even encourage Rhaegar to take a second wife because she somehow values his belief in prophecy over her life and the lives of her children is literally unbelievable. And that is just from a pragmatic political perspective. Aside from the Kingdom of Dorne, Westeros obviously isn't very progressive when it comes to the rights and treatment of women. And while Elia was guaranteed to lose most of her political power if she married someone who wasn't Dornish, it's incredibly important to remember that her expectations for treatment were higher than most highborn women's would be. So it's very unlikely that she would accept being publicly humiliated on an almost unfathomable level. Clearly, plenty of people in positions of power will let bad behavior slide in service of their own ends. But for context, offenses as small as Tywin offering to betroth Elia to Tyrion was widely seen as an insult to Elia. Despite the fact that Ned Stark never treated Jon Snow as anything other than a bastard, his mere presence in Winterfell among his trueborn siblings is also seen as an insult to Catelyn. So if these issues are considered a significant offense, then naming Lyanna Stark the Queen of Love and Beauty publicly instead of Elia, and then abandoning her on Dragonstone for his chosen Queen of Love and Beauty, is arguably one of the most humiliating and insulting things Rhaegar could possibly do. And we see that insult reflected in the actions of House Martell, both during and after Robert's rebellion. Despite the fact that Elia was still stuck far from home, Doran Martell was reluctant to send help to House Targaryen during Robert's rebellion, specifically because his sister was treated so poorly. And as we see in the contemporary storyline, Oberyn is borderline feral with rage at what was done to Elia. And if he was willing to risk his life to avenge her death, he was almost certainly furious that his sister had been mistreated, embarrassed, abandoned, and then held hostage as a result of Rhaegar's actions as well. This also seems to be a pretty significant context clue about how Elia may have truly felt about Rhaegar. Doran, Oberyn, and Elia were raised in the same place by the same family with the same culture and values. Oberyn and Elia were as close as any siblings should be. So if Doran and Oberyn were enraged at Elia's treatment, the idea that she was a willing participant who took no offense at any of Rhaegar's decisions is a bizarre conclusion to come to. But the urge to make Elia a participant in this plan is an understandable one. Rhaegar Targaryen is one of the most idolized characters in the story. Many fans believe that he was correct about House Targaryen being a vital key to preventing the coming apocalypse. It is also commonly accepted that Lyanna and Rhaegar were true love, so it's cool. And obviously their union resulted in Jon Snow, who most believe is an essential player in saving the world. So seeing Elia Martell as a willing participant in this plan makes everything fit together perfectly, as it means that everyone was working towards a common goal and voluntarily sacrificed something for the greater good. However, it is an improbably hopeful interpretation of the story that really doesn't take Elia Martell as an individual into account. Firstly, there is no guarantee that Rhaegar even shared his beliefs about prophecy with Elia. Yes, Dany's vision clearly hints towards Elia being aware of the Song of Ice and Fire, but their relationship wasn't a truly loving one, and Rhaegar wasn't exactly overt and open about the details of his prophetic fixation. But even if he did tell her the truth, it seems incredibly unlikely that Elia would risk absolutely everything in service of Rhaegar's obsession, rather than writing it off as the kooky ranting of another mad Targaryen. Secondly, Elia functioning as Rhaegar and Lyanna's #1 supporter relies on the idea that Rhaegar's understanding of the prophecy was actually correct, which is a huge leap to make given that no characters have seemingly interpreted prophecies correctly before, and given that we know for absolute fact that Rhaegar has interpreted this prophecy incorrectly once before. But what's interesting is the grim subtext of this narrative interpretation. Because there is a bit of an implication that because Jon is the savior and because Lyanna and Rhaegar needed to bring him into the world, the ends justifies the means. And in a bizarre way, this can even be weaponized against Elia Martell as a character. Because the idea that Elia was voluntarily taking a back seat so these two special snowflakes could get together and make the apex special snowflake that the world needs is a comforting one. It means that Elia, Rhaegar, and Lyanna were all in on a plan that just got out of control and got them all killed. But if Elia had no choice and no control, and then had to watch as her children were brutally murdered before being raped and killed herself, then it's much harder to see Rhaegar as anything other than a villain. But this point of view still offers kind of an easy way out, because the foundation is built on the idea that Rhaegar was right and Jon is the hero the world needs. Meaning that if Elia didn't believe in something that sounds objectively insane, and if she wasn't willing to let Rhaegar create his final head of the dragon, then her death and the death of Rhaenys and Aegon is sad, but it was necessary collateral damage. It's an easy way to romanticize Rhaegar and Lyanna, and it marks Jon as a truly exceptional individual. But the cost of that perspective is the complete and total dehumanization of Elia Martell. Ultimately, we will likely never know the truth of what Elia was thinking, what kind of a person she was, or where she even stood on Rhaegar's position. But the characterization of her as a sexually liberated woman who would have unwavering faith in her husband's batshit crazy obsessions, and would encourage him to take off and impregnate a teenager while she stays behind, is one of the most common and least believable interpretations of her character. She, like any character, had a fully formed existence outside of Rhaegar Targaryen, Lyanna Stark, and Jon Snow. And the unfortunate reality is that her best interests were directly in conflict with and completely ignored in favor of characters who are perceived as more valuable and important. Based on common sense and context clues alone, it seems obvious that she would never be willing to risk her reputation, her children's claims, and the lives of her entire family, because she was so devoted to the beliefs of a man who had no qualms about publicly humiliating her and abandoning her. We might never learn who the real Elia Martell was, but she almost certainly is not the person that many fans think she is. But what do you think? Is the common interpretation of Elia Martell the right one? Leave your comments and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.